Honestly, I've been holding off on making a video on Trevor Lawrence for about a month now because the Jaguars were 8-3 and were one game away from taking the first seed in the AFC despite Lawrence's obvious struggles this season. Since this, however, they have lost 3 in a row and now face potentially losing their divisional lead to either the Houston Texans or Indianapolis Colts, including losses to the Burrowless Bengals on Monday Night Football in overtime, the Browns, who are on their 4th starting quarterback, Joe Flacco's the GOAT by the way, and just got spanked by the Baltimore Ravens on Sunday Night Football, with Lawrence losing 2 fumbles and throwing the ball 45 times. Lawrence has had a very up and down NFL career less than 3 years in. Some of it, of course, is on him, and some of it objectively is not. Today, I will go into that in further detail, as well as a caution as to using the generational label for quarterbacks too loosely. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more like it in the future, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you have not already. Also, be sure to leave a comment down below giving me your feedback as well as what you might want to see in the future. With that said, let's get right into it. Before we get into the first topic, I want to give a disclaimer based on the title of this video. Overrated does not equal bad. There are plenty of guys in sports who have been overrated and didn't pan out to what they were supposed to be, whether that be as a rookie or as a signing, but they were still good. Just kind of underwhelming, underachieved, especially to the expectations of a Trevor Lawrence. We are going to get into that though as we go through this video. The term generational in pro sports is typically used to describe a once-in-a-lifetime talent, a guy who will stand the test of time for at least 10 plus years to produce at an elite level. In the NBA, an example of a legitimate generational talent would be LeBron James, who has been producing at an elite level since he entered the league in 2003 and is still going strong in 2023. In the NBA, you get a lot of guys who have superstar potential, but you don't get a lot of those generational guys like LeBron. The 2 closest we've gotten was Zion Williamson in 2019 and Victor Wembanyama in this year's draft. You don't get a ton of guys entering the NBA draft with that much hype. In the NFL, it feels like you get at least one of those proclaimed generational talents every couple of years. We've seen it with guys in recent years like Leonard Fournette, Baker Mayfield, Jadeveon Clowney, Andrew Luck, Joe Burrow, and much, much more. We've seen it very recently too with the hype surrounding both Caleb Williams and Drake May. However, throughout my time watching football, I don't think I've ever seen a prospect in football as hyped up as Trevor Lawrence. It seems like every QB projected to go top 5 in the draft is compared to Peyton Manning in some way, shape, or form, but with Lawrence, it was believable. Keep in mind, I've been very vocal about my lack of knowledge about college ball on this channel. They'll have a decent pick to get a solid quarterback prospect. Which one? Beats me. I barely know shit about college ball. But I would see Lawrence very frequently, and the talent was undeniable. He threw for 90 touchdowns in 40 games at Clemson and won nearly every single game he played. And the only games that he lost were to Justin Fields and Ohio State in the semifinals and Joe Burrow and LSU in the national championship game. The hype around T-Law was very real and very deserved given the circumstances, and he was rewarded for his play at Clemson by being taken with the #1 overall pick in the 2021 NFL Draft by the Jacksonville Jaguars. That is, of course, if you consider playing for the Jaguars a start your career reward. In 2021, the Jaguars receiving corps consisted of Marvin Jones, who wasn't bad but not good enough to be a wide receiver 1, Laviska Shenault, and Laquan Treadwell. They had no run game, their line was atrocious, their defense was hanging on to the last remaining pieces of that Jacksonville 2017 defense for dear life, and their new head coach, former Ohio State coach Urban Meyer, just kicking it down in Florida waiting for his tenure as head coach to begin. Despite all that was against him, I don't think anybody, even Trevor Lawrence himself, expected what was coming next. We will begin with his rookie season, where he threw for under 60% completion, had 22 total turnovers, and the Jaguars finished the season 3-14. Stand-up guy Urban Meyer got fired for starting the season 2-11 and for being the overall piece of shit we all know and love. I didn't even see this until doing research for this video, but apparently during the final game of the season versus the Colts, Jags fans dressed up as clowns to protest the direction this team has taken. The stats themselves were excusable for the most part, as it was Lawrence's first season in the league, with him throwing to Starbucks baristas as well as off-the-field issues. But as time has gone on, his turnover problem has not gotten much better. Since entering the league, and as of the recording of this video, he leads the entire NFL in turnovers with 55, coupled with 66 total touchdowns for his career, 55 passing and 11 rushing. That leaves him with only a plus 11 differential. You will see throughout this video that his stats get progressively better over time as they will add actual players to the offense like a Calvin Ridley or Christian Kirk, as well as Travis Etienne, who was drafted in the same draft as Lawrence, taking RB1 eventually from James Robinson, who would later fade into obscurity somewhere. The following season, the Jaguars, now under head coach Doug Pederson, who we will talk about later on, won the AFC South for the first time since 2017 and the second time overall. This would earn them a playoff spot where they would play Justin Herbert in the Los Angeles Chargers in a wildcard game, where the Chargers would take a 27-0 lead only to blow it and lose 31-30 behind a remarkable turnaround for Trevor Lawrence, who threw 4 interceptions in the first half and 4 touchdowns overall. They would go on to lose in the divisional round to the eventual Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs, but this would spark hope in a franchise that has seen so little of it throughout the franchise's existence, as well as the franchise itself, who desperately needed some positive energy and momentum going forward. Jacksonville will begin this season with a ton of momentum, winning 8 of their first 11 games, only being out of the number 1 seed in the AFC by 1 game. Most of those wins were beating up on teams with terrible offenses like the Steelers or Titans, or winning by 1 score versus solid defensive teams like the Saints or the Bills, but a win's a win in the NFL no matter how you want to phrase it. These wins weren't pretty for the most part, but they were wins, so that's all that really matters at the end of the day. However, the games I mentioned at the beginning of this video with the Bengals, Browns, and Ravens exposed their weaknesses in the run game, averaging just 68 yards on the ground per game with 3.3 yards per carry, as well as their defense, as they have allowed an average of 29.3 points per game during the stretch. Lawrence himself, during this span, has had 5 turnovers and has suffered 2 injuries, 1 to his leg versus Cincinnati and a concussion versus the Ravens. This team has sort of lost its way, and while a lot of it has to be put on the players on both sides of the ball, I think the coach should face a significant portion of the criticism with his players, especially considering that we've seen this play out on a much larger scale with this particular individual. Which brings me to my next point of discussion. After reaching the highest of highs in Philadelphia as well as the lowest of lows, Doug Pederson took his talents to Jacksonville, Florida to help a young Jaguar squad. After the success he had with the Eagles and Carson Wentz, the organization probably thought that Lawrence would thrive under a Super Bowl winning coach who almost produced a league MVP in Carson Wentz. The mindset was there, but if you really look further into it, it's arguable that it might not have been the best move long term. Yes, they did win their division last season, and they even did win a playoff game, but you have to wonder if maybe this will be the peak of the Pederson regime. The following are things to compare with Doug Pederson's most successful year with the Eagles, which was the Super Bowl year, and the year following that versus the Jaguars last season, which was their most successful year in a long time, and this year currently. If you look at total rushing yards for the 2017 Eagles, they were 3rd in the NFL. The next season, they would drop off a cliff and go 28th in the NFL. For the 2022 Jaguars, they were 14th in the NFL in rushing. They were not really near the top of the league, but, it was still relatively improved. You go through this season, they are 25th in the NFL through week 15. We go through passing stats. Now, keep in mind, Carson Wentz was their quarterback, and he did miss a decent amount of games due to just injuries. But he ranked 19th in the NFL in passing yards and 4th in the league in passer rating, where in 2018 in 11 games, he was 21st in the NFL in yards. Now we go to Trevor Lawrence. He played all 17 games last season. He was finished 9th in the NFL in passing yards and was tied 9th in passer rating. And you could see his touchdown interception ratio was not bad at all, with 66% completion. This year, Trevor Lawrence has played every game so far. You can see there's a bit of a dip. He's on pace to have more yards than he did last season, but his passer rating dipped. You can see his TD to INT ratio has dropped drastically. It's not just on the offensive side of the ball, though. If we look at the defense as well, in 2017, the Eagles were 4th in the NFL in points per game allowed. They were 17th in pass yards allowed, and they were best in the league in rushing yards allowed. In 2018, they allowed 3 more points, which was 12th in the NFL. They finished near end of the league in pass yards allowed, and they were 7th in rush yards allowed. Now, if we look at the 2022 Jaguars, they were 12th in the NFL in points per game allowed last year. They were near the bottom of the league in pass yards allowed, and they were 12th in rush yards allowed. For 2023 so far, they are 21st in the NFL in points per game allowed. They are 29th in passing yards allowed, and they are 12th in rush yards allowed. I kind of sense a pattern, do you? I think the element of surprise in the first and second year of his tenures with the Eagles and Jaguars respectively led to their successes, but when teams figured it out, that was it. He didn't adjust anything offensively or defensively, and teams saw right through that. In my opinion, that's why he went 22, 25, and 1 through the rest of his Eagles tenure, and I say only very loosely because it was still a Super Bowl year, he only had that 1 year in 2017 to really show for it. Outside of that, you can argue that besides Wentz's injury issues he'd struggle with the remainder of his time as a starter, he never improved, and I credit that partially to Pederson failing to adapt over time. One thing I will give to Doug Pederson is that he's a clear upgrade over Urban Meyer, but that's such a low bar in an NFL level that I feel like I could potentially do better calling my cross drags in my Madden playbook. In conclusion, I don't think Trevor Lawrence is bad or that his problems are unfixable, but they exist and they are very prevalent. Not everyone's going to be this machine that can do everything, and anyone expecting that just doesn't understand how human beings work. Humans make mistakes, and it's on them to move forward and try to correct them, and we're also only 3 years into his career at this point. He has plenty of time to turn it around. He has already shown that he will most likely be Jacksonville's quarterback for the next decade at minimum, barring injury. However, I don't feel he has come close to living up to that Peyton Manning hype he received at the college level. So to answer the question, yes, I do believe that Trevor Lawrence is overrated. He's a guy that will either throw a great football or overthrow a man by 15 yards. A guy that will either go for 300 passing with 4 touchdowns or will be a turnover machine. He's very inconsistent, but I don't see the Jags moving on from him, nor do I think they should. I mean, hey, they just won a playoff game off of his back, so obviously something is there. It's just a matter of if he will become what people thought he would be early on in the process, or if he'll be another variation of Josh Allen, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But what do you think? Let me know down in the comments your opinion on the subject, as well as what you might want to see from me in the future. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all next week. Peace out.